Welcome to our conference, Inside Outside, 10 Years of the AK Party, Government Revisited. This conference has been organized by the Modern Turkish Studies Center and the Department of Political Science. This is an exceptional conference as it will be the first time that this type of a conference has been organized in Turkey. And so we're very excited that you are all here, and hopefully we will have a wonderful conference that everyone will benefit from. In order to start it up, I would like to invite our rector, Ahmet Ademoğlu, to the stage, please, for his opening speech. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Member of the Parliament, dear colleagues, professors, students, and distinguished guests and dignitaries. On behalf of İSTANBUL ŞEHİR University, I would like to welcome you all to this interesting workshop, which is being organized by the Center for Modern Turkish Studies and the Department of Political Science and International Relations. I think it's important to underline the fact that the objective of this meeting is neither to eulogize nor to defame the AK Party, but rather to understand it as a political phenomena as it transformed the country in the last 10 years from various respects, ranging from politics to culture to economic infrastructure and otherwise. So I know it's a bit controversial in terms of its concept, but our aim is to bring together all the distinguished scholars from the country and from abroad as well, and put this meeting together so that people can discuss and reflect on what has happened in the last 10 years in an objective scholarship framework. And I would like to, I think some people deserve mentioning for credit. Professor Ümit Cizre, who is the director of the Center for Modern Turkish Studies, has been the champion of this event, and also her colleagues, Professor Burhanettin Duran and Dr. Muzaffer Şener and Dr. Talha Köse, and other scholars from İSTANBUL ŞEHİR University also gave a lot of support for this event. And I also would like to thank all our visitors from Turkey and from the world to come and participate in this event. And I hope that this is going to be a very interesting and intellectually fostering event that will echo its results probably as a publication so that it can be disseminated to the public at large. And thank you very much for your coming, and I would like to say hello to everybody again. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Ademoğlu. I would now like to invite Dr. Ümit Cizre, the director for the Center of Modern Turkish Studies, to give her opening speech as well. Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished guests, colleagues and students. On behalf of the organizing committee and the Center for Modern Turkish Studies at ŞEHİR University, I am also delighted to welcome you to the Inside Outside, the 10 years of the AK Party Government Revisited conference. This is a first for Turkey, as the Chancellor stated, a truly academic conference on the AK Party, acting on the premise that this is an indispensable subject for understanding modern Turkey, and the most prominent actor in Turkish politics since its rise in 2002. The conference has uniquely brought together distinguished scholars and political practitioners on a national and international scale to contribute their perspectives, scholarly findings, and rich experiences in some cases to a critical, scholarly, soul-searching meeting on the AK Party. And I like to underline this part, a critical, scholarly, soul-searching meeting on the AK Party. For 10 years, actually 11 years now, the AK Party has sparked much global interest, wonderment, skepticism, imagination, wild support, and sharp opposition, as well as interesting articles and striking book titles. Unfortunately, many of these have been filled with biases for or biases against the party and self-serving dogmas. And yet, some of the works have been excellent and thought-provoking, and I'm not going to say which ones were good and which ones were bad, but we find it necessary as the Department of Political Science and International Relations and my center for ourselves and for the next generation of academics to draw a line in the sand on 2013, May the 31st, at this point in history, to give a very serious focus to the AK Party. The conference committee has put together a truly unique program that addresses critical questions and issues about the AK Party, the nature of Turkey's politics and society, as well as Turkey's regional and global foreign policy. I am sure that in the spirit of open discussions and critical thinking, the two extraordinarily important criteria for us, the participants will exchange and expand their views on these problematics and carry out analyses from different disciplines to discuss issues related to the struggles, processes, controversies the ruling party has engendered for the last 11 years. And as the Chancellor pointed out, importantly, the findings of this conference will also be documented in the form of a volume which will serve as a useful source of knowledge for future discussions. This conference is no small part due to the hard work of the organizing committee led by Professor Burhanettin Duran, Muzaffer Şenel, actually he is the hero, Professor Hasan Köse Balaban, Professor Talha Köse, among others. I have to mention Professor Abdülhamit Kırmızı, who is around here. Yes, he's there. Professor Fahrettin Altun, Professor Fatih Aysam, and, more importantly, a team of young graduate assistants who work selflessly to make it all come true. Allow me also to introduce them. Ayşenur Altuntaş, Ayşegül Abut, they're all sitting there. Ayşegül Taşkapı, Hazal Duran, Erkan Güneş, and Yekta Zülfikar. I would like to express our gratitude to all of this group. Well done. I wish you all, finally, especially to the participants from abroad, a pleasant stay in Istanbul, above all, and a happy return to your home with what I hope to be constructive inspirations and many positive memories from this conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Cizre. I would now like to invite Assistant Professor Didem Havlioğlu in order to introduce our next guest, who is also our keynote speech. Thank you very much.
Good morning. We are very fortunate today to have a very prominent scholar of the Middle Eastern studies, and he will deliver the keynote speech, Dr. Fawas Gerges, and he will share his insights about the current affairs in the Middle East. So I'm going to give a very brief introduction. Many of us are very familiar with his work, but to remind you a little bit maybe. Fawas Gerges is a Lebanese-American academic and author with expertise on the Middle East, U.S. foreign policy, international relations, Al-Qaeda, and relations between the Islamic and Western worlds. He is currently a professor of Middle East politics, international relations at the London School of Economics and Political Science. He also holds the Emirates chair of the Contemporary Middle East at the LSE, and is the inaugural director of the LSE Middle East Center. Dr. Gerges earned his MS at the London School of Economics and a PhD from Oxford University. He taught at Oxford, Harvard, and Columbia Universities, and was a research scholar at Princeton University for 2 years. He held a Christian Johnson Endeavor Foundation chair in Middle Eastern Studies and International Affairs at Sarah Lawrence College. In the last decade, Gerges spent 5 years conducting field research in several Middle Eastern countries on several topics and subjects, including social movements such as the Muslim Brotherhood and jihadist groups such as Al-Qaeda, on Arab and Muslim politics in the 20th century and relations between the West and the Muslim world. His articles routinely appear in prominent journals like New York Times, The Guardian, but he published extensively on his subject. But I'm going to mention few books that might interest you. For instance, Journey of the Jihadist Inside Muslim Militancy in 2007, and The Far Enemy, Why Jihad Went Global in 2009. Meanwhile, the Washington Post selected The Far Enemy as one of the best 15 books published in the field. But recently, on the 10-year anniversary of 9/11, the Oxford University Press released Gerges' book, The Rise and Fall of Al-Qaeda in 2011, and his last book is Obama and the Middle East in 2012. The title of his talk is Whether the Arab Spring, Disentangling Myth from Reality. We look forward to his remarks, and afterwards we're going to have a Q&A, right? Please welcome Dr. Gerges.
Thank you so much for this kind invitation. And I'm really delighted to be here. In fact, I'm honored to be here. And I want to thank the organizers of this committee for the opportunity to share some thoughts about the Middle East, and in particular my area of study, that is the Arab world. And the reason why I'm very delighted, because as you know, my topic is not an integral part of the central theme of this conference, the AK party government in the last 11 years. But I keep reminding, and we don't need to remind ourselves, of the importance of the Arab Middle East to the AK government party. I mean, I think I would not be exaggerated to say that the Middle East, the Arab Middle East, has emerged as a pivotal theater for the party government. And similarly, I think for the Arab world, I think the model and the example of the AK party government resonates widely in neighboring countries. I mean, I'm not saying anything original here. And I think it's this dialectic of discovery and rediscovery for both camps, which is really one of the most distinctive features, I would argue, of the AK party government in the last 11 years. And many of my colleagues, including my friend, Professor Ayub, will address this dialectic relationship between the Arab Middle East and Turkey, and the discovery and the rediscovery of relations, both economic, sociological, and political relationships. But final point, before I come back to my major theme, I would argue when the history of the AK party government, in particular foreign relations and regional relations, is written in the next 50 years, I would argue the rediscovery of the Arab Middle East will be one of its major contribution, and it's part of its major legacy in both foreign relations and international relations. But let me come back to my major theme, which is not really directly addresses the question of the AK party government, but rather it's about what I call a narrative that has become part of the received wisdom among Western commentators. If you read from the New York Times to Time magazine, to the idea is we are witnessing the withering of the Arab Spring. We are seeing the end of the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring has turned into a dark winter. This particular fleeting moment of hope basically has finally evaporated. This is becoming now part of really the major debates, whether it's, the New York Times editorial page. It's the whole idea that somehow 2 years of a hopeful moment in the history of the Middle East basically has gone. And I think the reason why this is a very important point for us to discuss, because I think underlying this particular receive wisdom narrative is, I think, the idea that agency and popular will forget about agency and popular will in that part of the world. That is, the narrative goes that a moment of sunshine blinded Western commentators to eternal realities about that part of the world. The reality, the eternal realities of the Middle East, the common is that sect, ethnicity, and real divisions are much more important of any kind of popular will and agency. And basically, Western commentators, what they're really saying is that the fault line, the sectarian fault lines, the tribal fault lines, the division that exists in that part of the world cannot be really tackled and controlled except by a strong hand, a strong man, a dictatorship. That is the underlying themes of this dominant narrative. To me, as a student of the Middle East, basically, it worries me a great deal because it had become part of the received wisdom. First of all, I'm not suggesting that this narrative is not based on some contemporary facts. Let's look at the Middle East today. The Middle East today is in turmoil, real turmoil. Syria is imploding. Syrian conflict has mutated from a popular uprising to an internal armed struggle, and now it's open-ended wars by proxies, not to mention similar to the Cold War between the United States and Russia. We can talk about Syria. Egypt, as you well know, faces a two-pronged crisis, a deep structural political crisis and a very structural socioeconomic crisis. Again, we can talk about Egypt and what's happening in Egypt later on throughout Libya. The central state remains more of a, you might say, work in progress. The central government has not taken place. Local militias remain very powerful players in Libya. Yemen is basically, Yemen, the multiple cleavages in terms of regional and tribal and ideological cleavages. Bahrain faces some major political problems. The challenges have not been addressed. So how do we make sense? How do we make sense of this turmoil that exists in the modern Middle East? Do we look at it in terms of really on the surface and say, well, look, the Middle East is back to its old ways. There is no hope for this part of the world. Agency and popular will, forget about it, or do we try to understand what's happening within what I call a comparative historical perspective? What I might talk today is really just a footnote. I want to put some ideas on the table to see whether we can understand what's happening in the Arab Middle East, in the broader Middle East, in comparative historical perspective, instead of looking at it in terms of a correspondence view of the turmoil that's basically engulfing the entire region. I think if there is one particular point I want to make today is that it is very, very critical for us, as students of the social sciences, it's very critical for us as students of the social sciences to make a clear distinction between the drivers and the underlying reasons of the large popular uprisings that have taken place in the last 2 years and a half in the Middle East and the possible outcomes of these revolts and revolutions. I think what most commentators do, they confuse what I call this significant historical moment in the Middle East with possible outcomes. That is, they want instant outcomes, instant, basically, results. They expected somehow the large popular uprising to produce constitutional democracies overnight. That's the whole idea behind the dominant narrative today. Instead of looking at what's happening in the region as part of the historical, significant historical revolutionary moment, I would argue, and I hope you disagree with me, is that you cannot understand what's happening in this part of the world as really except in terms of great historical moments, whether it's the aftermath of the French Revolution or the aftermath of the Russian Revolution, great historical moment, large-scale popular uprisings, waves of protests, collective action, social protest. Societies have been turned upside down, and they are trying to find ways and means to resolve the underlying social and political struggles in the region. That is, I would argue that basically by understanding the structure of the social and political crisis that exists in the region, and they are two-pronged, remember. They are political, deep political crisis, institutional crisis, and socio-economic crisis. I think we can begin to have a better understanding of what might replace these dictators, these political authoritarian structures. Because unless we understand why the popular uprisings have taken place, what were the drivers, what were the causes, what really basically why the turmoil exists, we cannot understand what kind of world will replace the old political authoritarian structures that has existed in the region since the end of the colonial moment in 1950s, in the early 1950s. And I think beyond the gloom and doom of a newspaper's headline and all the commentaries that we read, I think what we have witnessed is, again, to repeat, a revolutionary moment. A revolutionary moment that's still unfolding before our eyes. That this is not the end of the process, it's the beginning of a complex, revolutionary, fragile, politically collective action process in the Middle East. And I think this particular process will play out before our eyes, not in 1 year, not in 2 years, not in 5 years, in 1 or 2 decades. That is, we should not expect instant results to emerge out of this particular revolutionary turmoil. And the reason why, let's look at history, let's look at the world. I mean, what do students of Southern Europe in the 1970s tell us about the process of transition? 2 decades in Southern Europe, 1970s up to the 1990s, till the dust settled on the battlefield. Let's look at Eastern Europe in the 1980s and 1990s, Latin America in the 1990s, East Asia in the 1980s and 1990s. One of the lessons that we have learned is that after moments of revolutionary upheaval, it takes a great deal of time, of resources, of energy, of great social and political struggles for the dust to settle on the battlefield and for societies basically to settle down on a particular political or social process. So in many ways, the social and political struggles unfolding will unfold for the next 1 or 2 decades in Tunis, in Egypt, in Syria, in Yemen, in Bahrain, and in other countries as well. And I think that's to be expected. It is natural. What we're seeing, as a historian myself, I'm not surprised, because this is part of, because if you understand what the nature of the crisis in the Middle East, think of what has happened in the last 60 years. Think of the institutional damage that has been done in the Middle East in the last 50 years. The existing dictators that existed in Egypt, in Syria, in Libya, in Yemen, and in other places have almost destroyed the very social fabric of the fragile institutions that even existed under colonialism. In fact, and I am exaggerating here, I am one of the students of the Arab world who say that basically even the state itself, as we know it, was no longer, we don't have formal states, what we define institutionalized base states. That is, the bloody dictators that have ruled the Middle East for the last 60 years destroyed the formalized, institutionalized states and created in their place, what did they create? Family-based states. The formalized, institutionalized states have been replaced by family-based states. The Mubarak family-based state, Al-Assad family-based state, Ali Abdullah Saleh family-based state, Gaddafi family-based state, and on and on and on. What am I trying to say is that you have to rebuild the institutional structure from the bottom up, block by block. And institutional building, as we know from Turkey, will take time, will take space, energy, great social and political struggles. In the meantime, you're going to have setbacks, you're going to have regression, you're going to have great upheavals in societies. Turkey is a classic case of how the process of transition has taken decades as opposed to years. And I think what we're seeing in the Middle East is a classic case of societies trying to rebuild their fragile institutions block by block. The struggles we are seeing actually are historical, comparatively, relevant, and can be compared and made sense in terms of looking at the world, whether it's Spain, whether it's Latin America, whether it's Eastern Europe, whether it's Indonesia, and what have you. There is nothing unique about the social and political struggles engulfing the region after this particular great upheaval. So yes, there is contentious politics for some of you students of the social sciences, collective actions, waves of protest, social protest, they will be with us for many, many years. And the beauty about these social protests, think of what Assad has thrown at, the opposition in Syria. Massive force. Yet, the Syrian uprising, the Syrian armed resistance now is still alive. People are still defying the bloody dictatorship. The same thing in almost every single country. Waves of protests in Egypt, in Yemen, the same thing, tells me that agency is alive and well. That social protest, of course, it's scary for commentators when they see, but it's not, to me, it's not scary. It's part of basically the great social and political struggles that will be with us for many years. The big point is that there will be no closure in the short term. There will be no closure in the short term. If we expect instant results, I think we should shut down the shop and take on a different profession. Because I think this particular revolutionary moment has shaken the very foundation of the system, and I think in many ways what we are witnessing is the birth of a new world order in the region, of course. No one can tell what kind of world would replace the old one, how democratic, how viable. All I can tell you is that I expect the new world that will replace the old authoritarian order to be much more constitutionally oriented, and it will basically try to what I call institutionalize diversity. Diversity that has been decimated by years of dictatorship and political, and institutionalizing diversity, all of you graduate students of the social sciences will take a great deal of time. Because the whole idea of institutions is, we think of institutions in terms of elections and parliaments. It's in terms of trust. How do you build trust between political and social forces who have not had an experience to do so? You have accumulation. You have to create what I call a repertoire of accumulation, political trust, not just putting the parliaments and this will take time. Because what existed before, in fact, they did everything in their power to divide society along sectarian and tribal and regional lines. I'm not suggesting, for some of you who wonder, what are you talking about? They're saying there is no sectarianism in the Middle East. Look at Syria. I am saying yes, there is sectarian mobilization. There is sectarian division, but if you focus on sectarianism itself, you miss the big picture. Sectarianism is being manipulated, used, and abused for a variety of reasons. whether it's geostrategic interest or whether it's political interest. Bashar al-Assad now has basically said, look, I've told you, there is, this is a sectarian-based now civil war. Well, he did everything in his power to divide society along to come across as the protector of sectarian and minority interests. But despite everything that has happened in Syria, I don't believe we're talking about all-out sectarian strife, not at all. The reality is this is an ideological and political struggle, even though there are some major fault lines that have emerged as a result of the massive force that has been used and the blood and the river of blood that has taken place in Syria. Another point, and quickly, is that, again, as a footnote for really all of us students of the social sciences to think about, is that please, let's move away from what I call the binary model of politics in the Middle East. And this binary model of politics in America is very popular among some of my colleagues, political scientists. Republics, monarchies, weak states, strong states. Well, the republics will go, the monarchies will stay. That's now, it's nonsense. Binary politics by itself, as you know, these are normative models. They are constructed for a variety of reasons. We construct them based on normative as opposed. The question for us is that why diffusion has not taken place into some monarchies. We can talk about that. I don't think the aspirations of people in the Arab monarchies differ very much from the aspirations of the Arab republics. But we can talk about why it has been slower in the monarchies than it is in the republic. That's a different question. That diffusion, why diffusion has not been as strong, as intense, and as vibrant and potent. But it is wrong to say that the monarchies are immune. They are not immune of the popular uprisings that has shaken the very foundation of the region. That's the reality. And I think we make a terrible mistake in the same way that we were caught napping, talking about the Arab Street. We cannot talk about the monarchies as somehow above. And I'm not saying here, this is a conceptual point, because there are serious questions to consider about the various models, the various political models in the Middle East between the authoritarian republics, the family-based states, and the monarchies. But I think diffusion, I would argue, will ultimately reach every state in the Arab world, both monarchies and republics, even though in the meantime it's slower. The diffusion is slower than in the monarchies as it is in the republic. Let me come back to, because I promised to give you just a footnote, a very simplistic footnote about the nature of the crisis. Think when I say this is not about economic vulnerabilities. It's not just about bread and butter. It is a structural political crisis, and it's also a structural socioeconomic crisis. It's only by understanding this complexity of the crisis in the Middle East, in the Arab Middle East, we can really make sense of why the turmoil will likely be with us for a long time, as opposed to somehow the end of the Arab Spring or the withering of the Arab Spring. Think of the rallies, the rallying cries. Millions of people. And again, I know I want to bore you by just quickly talking about what were they. Al-Hurriya, Al-Aish, Al-Adala Al-Ijtima'iyya. Al-Hurriya, Al-Aish, and Al-Adala Al-Ijtima'iyya. Freedom, bread and butter, and social justice. In many ways, if you really want to understand where we are in the Arab world, millions, and I'm saying tens of millions of Arabs and Muslims have basically shouted over many years, whether it's in Syria or Yemen or Bahrain or Saudi Arabia in some parts, or in Lebanon, is that they want freedom, they want jobs, bread and butter for their families, and they want social justice. Let's summarize them. As students of how do we translate? This is about empowerment. It's about effective political citizenship. When they say freedom, they want to be citizens. They want to have a say in how their governments are organized. They want to seize the state back from the presidents for life. They want to seize the state back from the presidents for life, who basically devoured both state and societies. And so it's not just about economic vulnerabilities. It is about the popular will. It's a moment of self-determination. The millions of Arabs who have stood up, the millions, the tens of thousands of Syrians who have been killed. They're not just, they have been killed for just jobs, bread and butter. They want to have a say. They want to live as dignified citizens in their societies, even though I'll come back to the socioeconomic crisis. So unless these, waves of protest are satisfied that their voice there is heard, that their government reflect their aspirations, I think you're going to have a great deal of turmoil. Unless the institutional, unless you institutionalize diversity, unless you create a system that gives the impression, really, that somehow the system listens to the aspirations of the people, I expect this particular crisis to last for many years. So politics, popular will, institutionalization, effective citizenship lies at the very heart of the crisis. But here I want to move away and talk about economic vulnerabilities to give you an idea why we should not be surprised by what's happening in the region. Because if you really look, if you delve deeper into the structure of the Middle East, you realize why what's happening, in fact, to my mind, if we know a bit about the gravity of the social economic crisis, we really appreciate how little violence and turmoil that exists in the region. Think of the Arab world, 320 million people. 320 million people. What do you think when you think of the Arab world? Well, you know much better than my audience in the West usually. Because in the West, they think of the Arab world, it's a very simplistic, unfortunately, and not exaggerating. Either the wealthy sheikh in Knightsbridge in London or Las Vegas, or the violent Arab, young Arab that has been constructed after 9/11. I'm not being polemical at all. This is really what the dominant image, unfortunately, and that has resonates widely among some publics. Yet, are you surprised if I tell you that almost 150 million Arabs live either in poverty or below the poverty line on less than $2 a day? 150 million Arabs live either in poverty or below the poverty line on less than $2 a day. And this Arab spends half of the $2 on basic foods and necessities. 43%, we estimate 43% of Arabs across the board. I don't need to tell you, poverty in Saudi Arabia is between 18 and 20% in Saudi Arabia. You have 150 million Arabs who live either in poverty or below the poverty line on less than $2 a day, and they spend half of the $2 a day on necessities, on basic foods. And think when the fluctuation in food prices, in particular in the early part, the damage and how it did to the poor in particular. Unemployment, again, a statistic, don't buy this statistic. In particular, unemployment double digit, but among some of you educated youth in the Arab world, we estimate among the youth is between 50 and 60% unemployment rate. In Tunis, in Egypt, across the board, in some places much higher. Unemployment rate among the educated youth is almost 50% on average, even in Tunisia and Morocco and Algeria and other places. Think what it means. This particular crisis, when you have millions of Arabs, relatively educated, because unfortunately, our educational system in the Arab world is a great deal of damage has been inflicted on the educational system. There are many wealthy individuals in the Arab world. Please don't misunderstand me. Many wealthy individuals. But on the whole, Arabs have been pauperized, systematically pauperized. Arab populations have been systematically pauperized. While you have wealthy individuals, the entire population, Arab population, has been pauperized in the last 40 years. As a result, systemic policies that subscribe to a particular model of development. Some of you know political economists, the whole idea of the Washington Consensus and the neoliberal economic policies. The entire Arab population, 50%, has been pauperized as a result of systemic policies. I don't know if some of you know this, the Texas Income Inequality Database, and this is one of the most cited database on economic development. Well, we don't have development in the Arab world, we have de-development. we have stopped using the question of development. We say in the last 30 years, what we have witnessed in the Middle East, one of the wealthiest regions in the world, de-development. That is, money transferred from the bulk of the middle class, the agrarian, and to a very small select segment of society. That's, we call it de-development, as opposed, remember the whole idea of development. In the Middle East, we have the reverse. According to this, the Texas Income Inequality Database, the Arab world, by the way, we have many records in the Arab world. We top in terms of the youth unemployment, in terms of, we have, unfortunately, I mean, the wrong records, not the Arab world, we in the Arab world exhibit the highest income inequality of all regions in the world. The highest unemployment among the educated youth, the highest income inequality of all regions in the world, and one of the lowest and poorest quality per capita growth rates of all regions in the last 3 decades. I mean, think of so you have abject poverty, the highest, I mean, inequality rates in the region. I mean, and this is, I'm not talking about just in terms of urban poverty, the poverty belts that exist in various countries. I'm talking about agrarian poverty. On average, we estimate that the agrarian poverty, what happened is that there has been a major destruction of the agricultural system. As you know, most Arabs rely on agriculture, whether it's in Egypt or Syria. And the agricultural sector in the last 10 years has been decimated for a variety of reasons, because of these policies that base on services and tourism and what have you. So the agrarian structure, the agricultural sector, has been starved. In fact, money has been transferred from this, the poorest sector in society that most people rely on, to the services and real estate and what have you. And I mean, again, I don't have the time to go into the statistic to give you an idea. That is, not only we have the highest income inequality in the world, the Arab world is the highest regions in the world in terms of dependence on, in terms of food insecurity. We don't produce, even though we should be one of the most fertile regions in the world. I mean, Egypt, 80%. Sudan, I mean, should be the breadbasket in the world. Yemen, 90%. And no wonder why, I mean, if you look at the Arab uprising and what happened in the Arab world, most of the Arab uprisings took place in the agrarian sector, in the countryside, whether it was in Syria, in Dar'a, or whether it's in Tunis, or whether it's in Egypt. Really, if there is one particular point, is that convergence of both the urban poverty and the agrarian poverty provided what we call the revolt of the poor. And that's why the large popular uprising, the first time both the urban poor and the agrarian poor came together and produced this large-scale popular uprising that's similar to other waves in the international system. I want to conclude because how much time do I have? 10 minutes? Plenty of time. Thank you. I want to come back to, because I don't have time to go to statistics, so the question is, in a very simplistic, and I know I have simplified a great deal, because I don't have the time to flesh out really the structure of this particular two-pronged crisis, both political in the sense of the dictatorship that has basically blocked, I mean, there's a blockage in the system, both political and economic. Not to mention, I mean, the question of bread and butter. We're talking about basic survival, not to mention, I mean, political humiliation of people in the region. Are we surprised to witness the aftershocks of the large popular uprisings in the region? Should we be surprised, given, I mean, the gravity of this political crisis and the socio-economic crisis? I don't think we should be surprised. If we understand really the underlying reasons for the tensions and that still exists in the region. In the same way, the reason why I'm focusing, this is not a polemical point, in the same way that we were caught napping when the Arab uprisings exploded on the scene, I would argue we should not fall into a similar trap of underestimating the spirit of resistance and the role of agency and the role of society to really dream and imagine a different future in the region. Neither popular will nor agency is dead in the region. The fact that we are witnessing multiple waves of protest, again, gives me hope that the Middle East, the Arab Middle East, is going through similar historical and sociological processes to other regions in the world. In particular, when great earthquakes happen, you have aftershocks, and the aftershocks last for a long time. I'm talking about 2 decades. This is not reassuring for many of us, but as a historian, that's the reality. You have to, build institutions and societies and create a sense of trust among political and social forces. And what I'm trying to say is that the new waves of protest and collective action testify to the inability of attempts to really, have business as usual. It's no longer business as usual. And the post-Arab uprising governments have discovered this to their great shock. It doesn't matter, regardless of the nature of the political forces. All I am suggesting is that the situation is very dynamic. It is unfolding. It's very difficult to predict what kind of political and social structures would basically settle down in the region. The reason why we have to confess we as social scientists are never equipped to predict, because there's a great deal of dust, and we are, to a large extent, blinded by the dust, so much dust everywhere, because of the great social and political uprising. But let me say a few words here, see whether we can make sense of this, great deal of dust. And even though the Islamists, what we call the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, or Al-Nahda in Tunis, or Al-Adl wal-Ihsan in Tunisia, did not really take the lead role in the protest. They, as you well know, they did not really play a major role early on in the phase. I think they have emerged as the dominant social and political and ruling parties in almost every state. In Egypt, in Tunis, in Morocco, and I think in Jordan as well. And even if you have elections in Syria, the Muslim Brotherhood would do well. In Libya, they've done very well, even though they did not really have an outright majority. And I think the reason why, again, we should not be surprised, why the Islamists have done as well as they have. Because I think the Islamists were seen by a critical segment of the population as well. They were basically alternative to the corrupt and decadent and failed authoritarian order that existed. They were seen as morally and politically clean. They could deliver the goods. The Islamists have mastered the art of local politics. They have created institutions that resonated in local communities. As you know, politics is all about local politics. It's basically who organizes. They have promised to lead a different kind of political structure. And I think in many ways, please don't be surprised by the great social struggles that exist between, the basic fault line in the Arab world today is between what we call the liberal, secular leaning forces and the Islamist forces. This is what really the major divide in Arab society. The reason why there is also what complicates the process of transition, there is no model. The Arab world, there is no model for either the secular forces or the Islamists to rely on. This is a real complex question. In Eastern Europe, they knew exactly what they wanted. In Latin America, they knew exactly what they wanted. In the Arab world, I think the Islamists in the Arab world across the board look at the AK party government as a fascinating example. Truly, this to bring back, that is, they're fascinated by the AK party example and model in terms of both the ability of Turkey to be a society at peace with itself. It's in terms of identity, also as a rising geostrategic and geoeconomic power. And the Islamists are trying to find out, really to understand this model. And they would like, many Islamists in Egypt, they would like to imitate or even to take some distinctive features of the AK party government model. But one problem faces the Arab Islamists, and I know quite a bit about the Arab Islamists, is that they have not made the leap forward that we have seen in Turkey. And this is not surprising, because you can't just, political parties, transform overnight. That's not how it is. The Arab Islamists have come a long way. If you look at the Arab Islamists in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and look at the Arab Islamists today, truly they have traveled a long journey in terms of adaptation, in terms of accepting will of the people, in terms of parliament institutionalization, in terms of accepting, in terms of civil society, civil state. These are major developments. And I think most of the debate in the West does not really appreciate how long and how far the Arab Islamists have traveled. They still have a long journey. And I think the reason why they're fascinated with the AK party government model is that for this idea is that how do you build a moral order? How do you build an order based on, on a identity and also be a successful economic and democratic model? But the Arab Islamists, unfortunately, they're still prisoners, unfortunately, of the legacy of persecution in the Arab world, the legacy of mistrust, the legacy the Arab Islamists believe everyone is against them. And even though they're fascinated by the AK government model, I don't think that it's going to take them a long time to make the leap forward in the sense of really internalizing democracy as we know it, in the terms of really accepting the separation that exists in institutionalized societies, even though, but I think this particular journey will take 10, 20 years in the Islamists because, social groups and social movements are huge things because you have major debates taking place within the Islamist movement, and these debates they have to be resolved internally before. And also the Arab Islamists have come under tremendous pressure from the Salafis, the ultra-conservative Islamists that exist, and they have tried to balance the demands of the non-Islamist forces together with the pressure that's coming from within the base. And that's why the turmoil within the Islamist movement itself, and that's why the divide that's basically heating up, intensifying between the secular forces and the Islamists. All I'm suggesting that this is natural because both camps have to find a way out, have to find a mechanism to coexist, to institutionalize diversity and find political trust. And also I think what we need to is that the opposition, when we say the non-Islamists, the secular, liberal-leaning opposition, deeply divided, deeply fragmented, highly no roadmap for the future. So the liberal forces in Egypt or Tunis, they are united against the Islamists. But if you ask them what kind of roadmap, what kind of vision, there is no vision there. There is no model because, remember, the West is, when we say secularization, unlike Turkey, is very difficult in the Arab world because the idea of secularism and the al-Ulmaniyya in the Arab world, even the liberal voices in the Arab world have a deep mistrust of the whole idea of colonialism. You were very fortunate in Turkey because you fought your war of independence at the end of World War I. You were able to, have a nation that basically took many years, but yet you didn't go through this phase of colonialism that's really very deeply influenced and shapes political culture in the Arab world, both the Islamist and the secular forces. Let me conclude by saying is that one of the points I hope I have made is that in the next 5 to 10 years, I think my take on it is the Arab world will not, based on this turmoil and based on the gravity of the social political crisis, will not be a major player, a major factor in regional politics. That's the reality, and Professor Ayub written a major piece on this particular sense. I think for the foreseeable future, neither Egypt nor Saudi Arabia will be able to fill the vacuum of leadership in the Arab world. Egypt is very much preoccupied in putting its house in order. Egypt is really, I'm sorry to say, because I love Egypt for a variety of reasons, but it's a broken country. And it will take Egypt many, many years to put its house in order, both economically, institutionally, and politically. Major problems, major challenges. The damage done in Egypt, we don't have the time. Egypt in the 1950s, in the early 1950s, was ahead of South Korea and on the same bar as Japan in terms of median income. Egypt in the 1950s, the median income in Egypt was ahead of South Korea and similar to that of Japan. Egypt could have been the Japan of the Arab world. Egypt could have been the Turkey of the Middle East, had governance and political problems and wars not really devastated this country. Egypt today, you have on average almost 45 million Egyptians who live in poverty, abject poverty. And it's not just about poverty, it's no productive base. The damage done to institutions, the decline, the cultural decline that has taken place. Saudi Arabia is inward-looking. Saudi Arabia does not really have the capacity at this particular, because of the succession crisis, faces some major leadership. Again, many of you know all this. But what I'm trying to say is that really the only two models, the only two examples in the Middle East, in the Greater Middle East, you really have the AK party government model and Iran. That's the reality. In the next 10 years or so, or 10, 15 years. Iran, I don't need to tell you, I think politically and ideologically, Iran has failed as a model. Again, I'm not saying anything original here. Has failed to deliver a functioning political order for the Iranian people. That is, I don't see anyone in the Arab world looking at Iran as a model. I'm not talking about the politics. I'm talking about as a model or an example to either imitate or use. That is, literally, it's a dysfunctional system. It's a very fragmented system. It does not really provide any kind of ideological and sociological capital. Even Hezbollah in Lebanon does not really look at Iran as a model anymore. It has given up on that a long time ago. What you really have is that the Turkish model. But of course, Turkey has its own example. And that's why people are looking at Turkey as an example as opposed to a model, trying to see really what kind of distinctive features. And I think here, I would argue that Turkey can do a great deal, given its experience of institutionalization, in particular thickening institutionalization in terms of economic, in terms of providing training, in terms of small businesses, in terms of trying to offer guidance about transition and about trying to, even though I understand that Turkey has its own challenges, and you know these challenges much more than I do. But the reality is, Turkey can do a great deal in terms of soft power. My fear, and that's it, is that the power of Turkey, the Turkish example, lies in its soft power. That is one of the lessons that we have learned about Arab politics in the last 60 years. And if there's a book, all of you, I really would like you to read, is the book of Malcolm Kerr, The Cold War. It's a very tiny little book. It's a brilliant book. It really gives you an idea how difficult is to try to convert soft power into hard power, and in particular to get involved and embroiled in inter and intra-Arab conflicts. I think Iran is finding this to its great dismay and great damage, because it's deeply embroiled now in intra and inter-Arab conflicts. And this has done a great deal of damage. And the point what I'm trying to say is that Turkey's input and weight and influence and significance can be, and the AK in particular, can be maximized by using its soft power and by using its example as opposed to falling into the trap of other regional and great powers and trying to convert the soft power into any kind of being embroiled in the shifting sands of the region itself. But I think everything that I've said, I mean, despite the important differences and the challenges that exist in the region, despite the tensions, despite the waves of protest, despite the turmoil, despite the cleavages, despite all the dust that we are seeing in the region, I think that, to my mind, popular mobilization and hegemonic contestation will affect the very practice and theory of politics in the Middle East for many years to come. That is, you're talking about really hegemonic contestation is here to stay in the Middle East. Popular will and agency have not evaporated in the Middle East. But regardless of what happens, as students of social movements, as students of history and sociologies, I would argue that this revolutionary moment in the Middle East has turned the wheels of history in a very progressive direction, despite all the pain, despite all the turmoil that we have witnessed and will likely witness in the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gerges, for this wonderful speech. We will have a 15-minute break, and we'll follow with the plenary speech by Yalçın Akdoğan, the Member of Parliament and Chief Advisor to the Prime Minister. So, a 15-minute break, please. Thank you.